I stood at the threshold of my new apartment, the dim light of the afternoon cutting through the curtains, casting long shadows on the floor. Moving boxes littered the space around me, some half-packed, others open, their contents spilling out like forgotten memories. I could smell the musty scent of old wood and dust, the kind of smell that told me this building had history, character. It had seen better days, yes, but it wore its age like a badge of honor. The wallpaper clung to the walls in faded remnants, peeling in places, as if the building had been trying to shed its skin for years but couldn't quite manage it. The floors creaked under my feet, the sound of countless footsteps settling into the bones of the place. Yet, there was something oddly comforting about it. The silence, the promise of solitude. I sighed softly, brushing a strand of hair out of my face. The late afternoon light was softening now, painting the room in warm golds and deep shadows. It was perfect. A sanctuary away from the constant pressure of college life, away from exams and assignments. I needed this. I needed the space to think, to breathe, to escape from everything that had been weighing me down. My fingers brushed against a dusty surface, and I glanced over at the old bookshelf against the wall. The shelves were stacked with books, spines cracked, faded with time, but still carefully arranged, as though someone had once cared for them. Someone who had probably long since moved on. I couldn't help but wonder about them. Who had lived here before? What kind of life had they led? Were there secrets buried in these books, waiting to be uncovered? As I bent down to pick up a box of textbooks, something caught my attention. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, just a shift in the air, a sudden coolness that didn't quite belong. The room, despite its worn charm, felt oddly empty, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something. I straightened up and scanned the room. I was alone. But that feeling didn't go away. It lingered, prickling my skin. I made my way across the room to the farthest corner, where a door stood slightly ajar. It didn't look like the other doors in the apartment. The wood was smoother, almost polished, and the brass handle gleamed in the fading light. I frowned as I approached. I had noticed the door the moment I stepped in, but something about it felt off. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't on the blueprint the landlord had given me, nor had Neil, the landlord, even mentioned it during our tour. I reached for the handle and turned it. It didn't budge. I tried again, pressing harder, but the door stayed firmly shut. Locked. My gaze drifted to the walls, studying the faint outlines where the door seemed to be hidden behind layers of peeling wallpaper. It was as if the building had tried to bury it, to make it blend in with the rest of the decay. But I wasn't the type to let things go easily. A flicker of curiosity ignited within me. What was behind that door? What was it hiding? As I stood there, contemplating, the building groaned beneath me. A soft creak that seemed to echo through the floorboards. I froze. The building was old, sure, and it made sounds all the time. But this sound was different. It was low, scraping, like something or someone was trying to get out. Scratch, scratch. My pulse quickened. I strained to hear over the pounding of my own heart. The scraping continued, faint but deliberate. My breath caught in my throat. Scratch, scratch, and then a soft thud. Silence. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my skin prickling as a chill settled over me. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from the weather outside. No, this was something different. Unnatural. My mind raced, trying to explain it. Rats? Old pipes? I shook my head. Number. This was something else. The curiosity surged within me, stronger now. I had to know. I glanced down at the crowbar I had used earlier to shift a heavy box of books. It was an impulse move, but now it felt like the only solution. I reached down and picked it up, my fingers tightening around the cold metal as I made my way back to the door. The sound came again, louder this time, more insistent, scratch, scratch, thud. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no turning back now. I pressed the cold metal against the door, the scraping sound driving me forward, pushing me to act before I could second-guess myself. With a grunt, I forced the lock to give way. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a space beyond. It was unlike the rest of the apartment. The darkness was suffocating, heavy with dust and neglect. But it was the large, ornate mirror that caught my eye. It stood against the far wall, tall and imposing. The glass gleamed unnaturally, reflecting nothing of the room I stood in. Instead, it shimmered with something I couldn't place. I hesitated, my breath caught in my throat. The air in the room hummed, thick with energy, and the unease grew, curling around my senses like a tight knot. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to the mirror. It was as though it was calling to me, beckoning me closer. Slowly, almost against my will, I moved toward it. The scraping sound pulsed with my movements, rising and falling like a heartbeat. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I neared the glass. And as my hand hovered over it, the room seemed to shift. The shadows stretched unnaturally, the edges of my vision blurring. And then I saw it. The reflection wasn't just a reflection. Something else stood there. Something waiting. It wasn't me. The reflection smiled. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a gentle glow across the apartment. It should have felt peaceful, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air. It was the kind of silence that seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I had spent most of the morning unpacking, trying to make the place feel like home. Books were organized, clothes folded neatly, and the furniture rearranged with care. I was determined to settle in, to make this apartment mine. But no matter how much I focused on the tasks at hand, there was one thing I couldn't shake: the door. It had been nagging at me from the moment I stepped inside. The locked door at the back of the apartment, hidden behind layers of peeling wallpaper. Unlike the other doors in the apartment, which were old but simple, this one was different. There was something almost deliberate about its presence. At first, I tried to ignore it. I had more important things to do. But no matter where I moved in the apartment, my eyes always found their way back to it. It loomed in the periphery of my vision, a constant, silent presence. As I stood by the window, letting the daylight warm my skin, my thoughts kept drifting back to the sound, the scraping noise from the night before. At first, it was so faint I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. The building was old after all, and old buildings made noises. But when the sound came again, louder, more insistent, I couldn't dismiss it anymore. It felt as though it was rising from the depths of the apartment, from behind that locked door. And now I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something unnerving about the rhythm of the sound, as if whatever was behind that door was alive, waiting, and had been there far longer than I had. I set the book I had been pretending to read down and glanced once more toward the back of the room. The door was calling to me again, not with words, but with a presence, an invitation I couldn't ignore. What could be hidden behind it? Why was it locked away? And why did I feel this pull, this need to know? With a deep breath, I walked toward the door. The closer I got, the heavier the air seemed to become, pressing down on my chest. I stopped just in front of it. The wood was smooth and dark, the brass handle gleaming faintly in the light. There was no sign of wear, as though it had been carefully preserved, untouched by time. I reached out and touched it. Immediately, I could feel the difference. It was smoother than the rest of the apartment, as if it had been kept in perfect condition for a reason. I turned the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, but it remained stubbornly closed. Frustration shot through me. There was no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. It was sealed, hidden behind layers of history. And then it came again, scrape, scrape, thud. I flinched, my heart pounding. The noise was unmistakable now, and I could feel the building groan around me as if it, too, was aware of what lay beyond the door. I had to know. I had to see for myself. I grabbed the crowbar I had used earlier to pry open a stubborn box, and without thinking, I went back to the door. My heartbeat was deafening in my ears as I positioned the crowbar against the frame. It's just a door, I told myself. Just a door. But as I pressed down, the door seemed to resist, as if it were fighting back. The frame groaned under the pressure, and for a brief moment I thought I might break something irreparable. But then, with a sudden click, the lock gave way. The building seemed to exhale as though it had been holding its breath. For a moment, everything went silent. The scraping stopped, and the air hung heavy with anticipation. A cold draft rushed from the door, and my stomach churned. There was something waiting for me on the other side. I gathered my courage and slowly pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound unnatural in the otherwise silent apartment. What lay beyond was a room that had clearly not been touched in years. Dust covered every surface, undisturbed by time or human hands. The room was large but suffocating in its emptiness. Old furniture sat under white sheets like forgotten relics of a time long gone. The air smelled stale, as though it had been sealed away for far too long. But it was the mirror that caught my attention. It stood on the far wall, ornate and gilded, its frame tarnished with age. The glass was unnervingly smooth, almost too perfect. As I stepped closer, I felt a pull toward it, like it was drawing me in. I stared at my reflection, but the longer I looked, the more I began to feel that something was off. The room behind me in the mirror seemed wrong. The furniture warped, the colors deepened, as though the mirror wasn't showing me the present. It was showing me something different, something twisted. A cold draft swept through the room, raising the hairs on my neck. For the first time since I had arrived, a deep, gnawing sense of dread settled in my chest. It's just a mirror, I thought. But the way the room felt, alive, almost, made me question everything I thought I knew about this place. And then it came. Scratch. My heart lurched in my chest. I spun around, but the door had closed behind me, soft as a whisper. I hadn't heard it, hadn't felt it. The room was eerily silent now, save for my breathing, fast and shallow. Scratch, thud. Something was stirring behind the mirror. My throat tightened as I took a step back, my eyes fixed on the glass. I wasn't alone. Something, or someone, was waiting for me in that room, hidden in the depths of the mirror. And it was watching me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the mirror. It was as though it had cast a spell over me, its glass gleaming, drawing me in like a moth to a flame. The room behind me and the reflection seemed to pulse, the shadows shifting and flickering like they were alive. For a moment, I wondered if I was hallucinating, if the exhaustion from unpacking had finally caught up with me. But no, there was something undeniably wrong about the way the reflection seemed to watch me, the details twisting in ways I couldn't explain. I took another step forward, and as my footfall echoed through the empty room, the air grew colder. A shiver raced down my spine, not from the temperature but from something darker, something ancient. Scratch. The noise again, louder this time, closer. I jerked my head toward it, my breath caught in my throat. It was coming from the mirror, from within the glass itself, as though something on the other side was trying to claw its way through. A thin crack appeared in the corner of the reflection, a dark line stretching across the surface, like a tear in reality itself. My pulse quickened. The reflection of the room behind me shuddered. The shadows deepened, and the furniture warped in the mirror, as if it had no true form, just a collection of broken shapes fighting to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. But then, something moved in the reflection. At first, it was barely perceptible, just a twitch. And then it stepped forward. I froze, my body refusing to move, trapped in a primal paralysis as the reflection in the mirror smiled. But it wasn't my smile. The reflection's eyes were darker, hollow, and the grin stretched unnaturally wide, curling into something cruel. It was my face, but twisted, distorted in a way that made my stomach lurch. The smile deepened, like a predator smelling its prey. It moved again, slowly, deliberately, as if preparing to step out of the mirror and into the room with me. Its fingers pressed against the glass, leaving faint marks as it leaned closer. The glass warped around its touch, as though it were made of liquid. I staggered backward, my heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to run. But my feet refused to obey. I was rooted to the spot, my gaze fixed on the doppelganger in the glass. "I've been waiting for you," the voice came. Soft, seductive, like a whisper slipping into my mind. The words were my own, but twisted, distorted, so dark that they seemed to echo from the depths of the mirror. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes darted around the room, searching for some explanation, anything that could explain this madness. But there was nothing. Just the mirror. Just that thing in the reflection, still watching, still smiling. "Come closer, Mia." The voice was insistent now, more commanding, curling around my thoughts, sinking deeper into my mind. I've waited for so long. It's time. A cold sweat broke out on my skin, and my body trembled, as if it had forgotten how to breathe. I could feel it. It was alive. The reflection wasn't just a mirror image, it was something more, something alive, and it was aware of me, watching me, waiting for the moment to step through. And then, as though the very air had shattered, the doppelganger spoke again. This time out loud, her voice clear and chilling. "You don't belong here, Mia." The words sliced through the silence like a blade, and I jerked involuntarily. The reflection in the mirror began to move in sync with me, mimicking my every motion, every twitch of my fingers. But there was something wrong, something horribly wrong. The smile in the mirror had stretched further, curling into an inhuman sneer. "I will take your place," the doppelganger purred. Her voice dripped with malice. "You've been chosen. You've been mine for so long." I took a step back, my legs weak, my head spinning. I tried to shake the horror from my mind, tried to make sense of it, but the air seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I reached for the door, desperate to escape, but the knob was gone. My hand collided with the wood, but it refused to budge, as if the room itself had sealed me in, trapping me with that thing behind the glass. "Don't be afraid," the doppelganger cooed, her voice dripping with venom. The reflection didn't just move anymore. It flickered, shifting like an image out of focus, as if the boundaries between the glass and reality were beginning to blur. The doppelganger's form rippled, stretching and contracting, as if being pulled into the space between the glass and the real world. My breath caught in my throat. I reached out, my fingers trembling, the urge to touch the mirror overwhelming. But as my hand moved closer, the reflection's grin widened impossibly. Its eyes were dark as pits, and I knew, deep in my soul, that it didn't belong there. The air grew frigid, suffocating, and I could feel it. The mirror was pulling me in. The doppelganger pressed against the glass with both hands now, its fingers curling around the edges like claws. The surface of the mirror rippled, its surface warping and stretching, until it felt like the whole room was trembling. And then, with a sudden snap, like the crack of thunder, the doppelganger did something that made my blood run cold. It stepped forward. At first, it was subtle, just a shift, an inch forward. But then, with a snap, the mirror tore, and the doppelganger's form began to slide out of it. Its face was twisted, its lips curled into sick satisfaction, but its eyes, those eyes were empty, hollow, staring straight into my soul. "No," I whispered, the word coming out as a strangled gasp. The doppelganger's fingers slid through the glass like it was made of water, its body following with an unnatural grace. As it became more distinct, more real, I felt my primal urge to flee ignite. I stumbled backward, but before I could escape, a cold hand closed around my wrist, its grip like ice. The doppelganger's voice was low, almost affectionate, as it whispered in my ear. "You've been a part of me for so long, Mia." The voice was dripping with malevolent joy. "Now, I'm going to take everything you are." In that instant, I understood. This wasn't just about the mirror. It wasn't just about the house. It was about me. The doppelganger had been waiting for me, lying in wait, dormant, just for this moment, to take my place. But I wasn't going down without a fight. With every ounce of strength left in me, I wrenched my arm free. My pulse thundered in my ears as I backed away. The doppelganger reached for me, its fingers growing longer, more distorted. I glanced at the mirror. It was still there, still watching, still waiting. And somewhere in that reflection I saw it, the smile. Wide and cruel, never leaving the doppelganger's face. The fight had only just begun. My breath was ragged, my pulse hammering in my ears, drowning out everything except the cold, suffocating fear that clung to me like a second skin. I staggered backward, my body refusing to obey my command to run. The room seemed to stretch, the walls pressing inward, narrowing the space between me and the thing that had emerged from the mirror. The doppelganger's form was fully out now, standing tall before me, unnaturally composed. It was me, and yet it wasn't. There was nothing human in its movements, nothing real in the way it smiled at me, its lips twisting upward in a grotesque parody of my own features. For a moment, everything was still. My body was frozen, my eyes wide with terror as I stared at the doppelganger, unable to look away. Its eyes were empty voids, black as the night, consuming everything around them. There was no warmth there, no familiarity, only cold, malicious emptiness. It smiled again, and I felt my legs tremble beneath me, threatening to give way. "You should have stayed away," the doppelganger purred, its voice a twisted echo of my own, laced with a quiet menace that sent a chill down my spine. "This is where you belong now. Behind that door, with me. You're just another piece of the puzzle." Its hand reached out, and I instinctively stepped back, my heart thudding in my chest. The doppelganger's fingers, my fingers, were impossibly long now, like claws. The skin stretched thin and pale, with sharp tips that gleamed in the dim light. I could feel the panic rising in me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The door, the only escape, had already closed behind me, and the room seemed to have grown smaller, the walls pressing in, closing me in with this thing that had taken my place in the mirror. The doppelganger tilted its head, studying me, savoring the fear that pulsed between us. "You're too weak to stop me," it whispered, its voice low, almost affectionate in its cruelty. "You don't understand, do you? I'm you. I've always been you. But now I get to be free." My mind raced, the pieces of this nightmare swirling together like a storm. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. Yet every fiber of my being screamed that it was, that this thing that was me but not me, was going to take everything I had. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice hoarse. "Why me? Why now?" The tears welled in my eyes, the weight of everything bearing down on me. "What do you want with my life?" My words hung in the air, trembling, raw with desperation. The doppelganger's smile widened, cold and triumphant. "It's not just your life, Mia. It's everything you've ever been, your past, your future, your memories." It stepped closer, its movements unnervingly smooth, gliding across the floor as if gravity had no claim on it. "I've been waiting for this moment, watching you, living through you. And now, I'll take everything, the life you've built, the life you think you've chosen. It all belongs to me now." The weight of its words hit me like a punch to the gut. I could barely breathe through the tightness in my chest, my thoughts scattered. The doppelganger had been watching me all along, waiting. But why? How? "No," I whispered fiercely, shaking my head. "You're not me. You're not real. I won't let you take my life." Its eyes glinted, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker there, something human. But it was gone in an instant, replaced with that cold emptiness. It tilted its head, mockingly sympathetic. "Poor Mia," it said, as though I were a child who didn't understand her fate. "You think you can fight this. You think you have a choice. But you don't. Not anymore. I'm not just a reflection. I'm the truth you've been avoiding." The truth I'd been avoiding? What did it mean? I tried to steady my breath, to regain control of my spiraling thoughts. And then it hit me. The mirror, the locked door, the strange pull I had felt toward it all along. The building itself, this cursed, decaying place, had been built around something that was never meant to be disturbed. Something that had waited for the right moment to emerge. And that moment had come. "You've always known, haven't you?" The doppelganger's voice sliced through my thoughts like a blade. "The truth. That you're not really here. Not in the way you think. You were always meant to be mine." A flash of memory pierced my mind. An old song my mother used to hum when I was a child. The soft, haunting lullaby that always made me feel at home. But now, it seemed wrong. The lyrics twisted, out of place, darker than I'd ever understood. The reflection in the mirror hadn't just been a reflection. It had been waiting, manipulating my thoughts, pushing me toward this moment. The locked door, the strange sounds, the feeling of being watched. It had all been part of a larger design, one I hadn't been able to see until now. I glanced at the shattered mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. Could I destroy it? Could I stop this nightmare before it claimed me completely? The crack in the glass, the doppelganger's form still flickering in and out of reality, seemed to call to me, pulling at me like gravity. The doppelganger laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls like a death knell. "It's already too late," it whispered, its fingers curling around the air like it was holding the very fabric of my soul. "You cannot stop what is already in motion." But I couldn't give up. I had to find a way. There was no other choice. In the distance, a soft knock echoed from the apartment door. I snapped my head toward it, the brief moment of distraction enough to snap me out of my paralyzing fear. It was the only chance I had. I lunged toward the shattered mirror, my heart pounding in my throat. I grabbed the largest shard, its jagged edge glittering in the dim light. The doppelganger lunged after me, its hand stretching toward me, fingers clawing the air. "No!" it screamed, its voice a shrill, desperate sound that echoed in my mind. "You can't." With a single, violent motion, I drove the shard into the reflection, piercing the glass. The mirror screamed, a high-pitched wail that rattled the walls, shaking the very foundations of the room. The doppelganger howled, its form flickering, distorting as the glass shattered under the force of my rage. But as the last shard splintered into the air, the doppelganger's eyes locked onto mine. A final, chilling expression of triumph flashed across its face. "I will be back," it whispered, as the mirror's reflection began to fade into nothingness. I gasped for breath, my heart still pounding in my chest. As I looked at the shattered pieces of glass scattered across the floor, one thought consumed me. The battle wasn't over. The truth, whatever it was still waiting. The air in the room seemed to freeze the moment the last shard of glass fell to the floor. Oh, I stood there, my breath shallow, my heart a thunderous echo in my chest. The world around me had shifted, the walls now holding their breath as if the entire building was waiting for what would come next. The doppelganger, it, was no longer standing before me, but something in the air, a presence, lingered. Cold, malignant. My hands shook violently as I stood there, my eyes wide and unfocused, staring at the now shattered mirror. The glass was everywhere, scattered in jagged pieces across the floor, reflecting the dim light in fractured patterns. Some shards still hovered in midair, caught in the aftermath of my violent action, but they hung there like suspended moments, frozen in time. The room felt as though it had slipped into another dimension, one where everything was slightly off, where the very air tasted metallic and wrong. I could hear it, the scraping noise. Faint at first, like the soft hum of something dragging itself across the floor. I turned slowly, my body rigid, every muscle screaming for movement, but I couldn't move. My legs were weak, as if the fight had drained all the strength from my bones. My eyes darted to the pieces of glass, the fragments of my own reflection scattered on the floor. Some were just shards, small and sharp, others larger, reflecting parts of the room in grotesque ways. Each one seemed to show a different angle, a different part of me, but they weren't me. They were something else, warped, distorted, twisted. The scraping grew louder, more frantic now, as if something were pushing from within the shards of glass. My pulse quickened. I couldn't focus on any one piece for too long, my mind resisting the truth that was unfolding before me. And then, there it was. A single, trembling shard of glass hovered before me, spinning slowly, almost delicately, as though caught in the grip of some invisible force. My breath caught in my throat as I saw it, my reflection staring back at me. But this time, there was something different about it. The eyes were dark, far too dark, almost as if they were black holes pulling in the light. The grin on my reflection's face was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally, until the edges of the shard seemed to warp under the pressure of it. And then, it moved. My reflection, the doppelganger, it pulled itself from the glass, like something monstrous slipping through a tear in reality. The image rippled, distorting as the glass began to tear apart from within. The reflection stretched, growing larger, more pronounced. It was as if the mirror had never truly been broken, just fractured, with the pieces pulling together again, drawing the doppelganger back. I gasped, the sound tearing from my throat, raw with panic. The doppelganger in the shard reached out toward me, its fingers elongated, nails impossibly sharp, its smile widening with cruel satisfaction. It was coming. It was coming for me. The room tilted, warped and bent as my mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. The air grew thicker, heavier, and I could taste the fear crawling up my throat. This wasn't just a reflection. It was alive. It was moving. And it wanted me. No. My breath hitched as my hands flew to my sides, instinctively reaching for something to defend myself with. The room was bare, the only weapon within reach the shattered pieces of glass scattered across the floor. My pulse pounded in my throat, my heart drumming against my chest. It felt like the world was closing in, suffocating me, as the mirror began to reform. In a frantic blur of motion, I moved toward the nearest piece of the broken mirror, my hand trembling as it closed around a large shard. The edges were jagged, sharp, like teeth, and the weight of it in my hand felt too real, too heavy. But I didn't care. I couldn't care. This was it, my only chance. The reflection of my doppelganger in the glass flickered and shifted, its smile darkening with every passing second. It wasn't me anymore. It was twisted, a dark version of myself, and it was almost through. It reached for me from within the shards, its fingers curling around the edges like claws. Its voice, a mocking, familiar voice, slithered into my mind, a vile whisper. You can't escape me. You can't stop this. You belong to me now. With a scream of defiance, I hurled the shard toward the mirror still hanging on the wall. The glass shattered again, but this time it wasn't just a single crack. The entire mirror seemed to ripple, cracking along its surface like a spiderweb of destruction, each fracture spreading like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. The sound of breaking glass filled the room, louder, sharper, as the reflection in the mirror screamed, its face twisted in rage. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the doppelganger's form flickered, distorting into 1,000 jagged pieces, falling apart like a broken image. But even as the mirror shattered completely, I saw it. The eyes. The eyes of the doppelganger glowed with a cold, malignant light, flickering behind the glass, as if the creature wasn't fully gone. It wasn't vanishing, it was fighting to remain. With every piece of the mirror that fell away, the room seemed to darken, as though the very fabric of the world was unraveling. I could feel the cold from the glass creeping into my skin, freezing me to the bone. The last shard of glass floated in midair, spinning erratically, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. And then, with a final crack, the mirror collapsed into nothingness. The pieces scattered across the floor like shattered dreams, and the room fell silent once more. I stood there, trembling, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. I looked around the room. Everything was still, eerily still. The doppelganger was gone, the mirror shattered beyond repair, and yet I could still feel it. The presence, the awareness. My eyes flicked toward the cracked fragments of glass, the reflection still faintly visible in the pieces scattered across the floor. It wasn't over. The battle had been won, but I understood now. This wasn't just a battle between me and a reflection. It was a war that had only just begun. And I could feel it deep in my bones as the room seemed to watch me, waiting for the next move. A crack, small but unmistakable, appeared in the largest shard of glass. A dark figure, half-formed, flickered in its reflection. The doppelganger's eyes gleamed through the crack. It was still there, and it was never going to let me go. I stood frozen, my hand still gripping the shard of glass, the jagged edges digging into my palm as I fought to steady my breath. The room around me felt suffocating, the air thick with the remnants of shattered glass and the lingering presence of something other. The doppelganger, its twisted reflection, was gone, consumed by the breaking of the mirror. The walls, once alive with the pulse of its sinister energy, now stood still. Empty, silent, but something gnawed at me. The weight of a truth I didn't fully understand. A truth that crawled under my skin, whispering to me. I could still sense it, the reflection, the part of me that had tried to escape, that had reached across the veil to claim my life. It hadn't just been a creature in a mirror. It had been something more, something ancient, something tied to me, to this place. Was it gone? The thought danced on the edge of my mind like a flickering candle in the dark. I had broken the mirror. I had severed the link. But the coldness in the room, the lingering dread, it was still there. I took a cautious step forward, my feet unsteady, as if the ground itself was unstable. My eyes flicked to the shattered remnants of the mirror, scattered across the floor like forgotten pieces of a nightmare. The room was littered with sharp shards, their edges reflecting the dim light in eerie patterns. I didn't want to look at them. I didn't want to see what was still trapped within those pieces, but I couldn't look away. The largest shard caught my eye, the reflection still faintly visible within it. My own face? No, it wasn't me. It was the doppelganger. Its eyes were wide, too wide, the smile stretching far too much, as though it were about to break free from the glass entirely. And then, it happened. The shard in front of me moved. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was like something in the air had tugged at the glass, and the shard slid across the floor, its sharp edge scraping against the wooden boards. The room seemed to breathe again, the stillness shattered by the sound, like a low hum building from the depths of the earth. My heart skipped a beat. My pulse hammered in my ears. Something was pushing back. The doppelganger's reflection in the shard shifted again, its face distorting, becoming clearer, more real. The eyes locked onto mine, wide, empty, but still filled with that terrible hunger. No, 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 my mind screamed, my legs shaking beneath me as I took a step back, my breath quickening. But as I moved, the shard followed me. The air around me grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that my breath fogged in front of me. The reflection in the shard grinned at me, that same twisted, sickening smile, the smile that wasn't mine. And then, from the darkness of the room, a voice, my own voice, whispered from the shards of glass like it was coming from every direction, from every broken piece. "You can't run. You can't escape me, Mia. You've already made your choice." The voice was sweet, coaxing, but underneath it there was something dark and menacing, something ancient and patient. The doppelganger's form began to grow more defined, its shape solidifying. It was no longer just a reflection. It was alive again, its presence crawling out from behind the broken glass. I staggered back, a scream rising in my throat, but it was choked down by a suffocating pressure in the air. I glanced at the door. It was still locked, the old brass handle cold and immovable, as though the building itself refused to let me escape. The doppelganger's form shimmered before me, its movements slow and deliberate, as though savoring every moment of my fear. It was always going to be me, the doppelganger purred, its voice a soft caress that slithered through my mind. "You thought you could destroy me, that you could break free, but you are me. I've always been a part of you, waiting for this moment, and now that it's here, there's no way out. I've claimed this place. I've claimed you." My pulse thundered in my ears. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The shard in front of me, the mirror, was still pulsing, still drawing me in. I realized with a sickening clarity that the doppelganger had never been fully trapped. The mirror had only been a doorway, and the breaking of it, the shattering of glass, hadn't closed it. It had opened it wider. The doppelganger reached for me, its fingers elongating, stretching toward me like claws, its form growing impossibly tall. The reflection flickered in the shards, each piece warping as it reached out from the fractured glass, pulling itself back into the physical world. My skin crawled as I realized. It wasn't trying to destroy me. It was trying to take my place. My mind snapped into focus. I couldn't let it. I had to act. I had to stop this, or I would lose everything I was, my life, my future, everything. A sudden impulse surged through me, a desperate urge to fight, to destroy the last remnants of the doppelganger's hold over me. I grabbed the closest shard of glass, its sharp edge biting into my hand, and without thinking, thrust it toward the center of the broken reflection, aiming directly at the heart of the doppelganger's form. The glass collided with the shard, the impact sending a shockwave through the room. The doppelganger shrieked, its body writhing, its features distorting and shifting violently as the glass cut through it. My scream mingled with its, both voices blending into one chilling cacophony that filled the air. But as the shard dug into the glass, I saw it, the crack. It spread across the reflection like a wound, the doppelganger's face splitting down the middle. But even as it began to fracture, my heart skipped a beat. The face in the shard didn't just break apart, it shifted. One side of the doppelganger's smile twisted, darkened, until it seemed to linger in the glass itself. The crack spread further, and I felt the oppressive weight of the presence intensify. The room trembled. The glass pieces, the reflections, the very space around me, all of it seemed to shift. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the cracks in the glass deepened, the doppelganger's form slipping out of the fractures like something alive, too alive. And then, in a final, horrifying twist, the eyes of the doppelganger's reflection locked onto mine through the shattered glass. The smile widened, impossibly so, until the last shard of glass crumbled away. It was still there, in the reflection. But now I knew the truth. The doppelganger hadn't been trying to take my life. It had always been a part of me. And now, it was waiting for the perfect moment to step out of the glass completely.